I'm Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp out of Houston, Texas, and I'm back with another hemp report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Well, tonight, November 10th, we have an update, albeit sad, on the long saga that has been the Senate Agriculture Appropriations Bill. Now, you remember for months now, Mitch McConnell has been playing the game of trying to sneak hemp ban language in a large funding package that was tied to the entire government shutdown. Well, as of Sunday night, that the government took the procedural vote to reopen the government, that language remained, and it was a 0.4 milligrams of THC in an entire container or package of any hemp products. Most full-spectrum CBD products have more than that. So our economist at Bo Whitney Economics estimates that THC limit will eliminate 95% of the industry. So on Sunday night, it goes through, and the subsequent day, on Monday the 10th, Senator Rand Paul spent all day trying to ground up support from other Senate offices for an amendment that would strip the language from this large bill and instead ask that it be handled in other committees of jurisdiction like the Agriculture or House Energy and Commerce, which oversees the FDA. On the Senate floor, Rand Paul gave a passionate speech, and he was joined by a Democratic colleague from Oregon, Jeff Merkley, that spoke to the truths of the bill and mentioned the impact it would have on farmers and their districts. And I find it particularly interesting that Senator Merkley referenced that it was two senators from Oregon and Kentucky that worked on the 2018 Farm Bill together, albeit at the time it was Mitch McConnell and Ron Wyden. After Merkley's remarks, Senator McConnell also spoke. I'll say wasn't very passionate, and mentioned that this is going to protect CBD products and restore the intent of the 2018 Farm Bill by only allowing for industrial crops. The Senate was then asked to table the bill, which means that before you can even vote yes or no on Rand Paul's amendment, they were voting yes or no to even hear the amendment. And that tabling vote was overwhelmingly in Mitch McConnell's favor. As of this recording, I think it was 78-22, but that was not the official result. So it may go off one or two votes there. But still, Mitch McConnell played every card he had, cashed in all of his chips, and called in a lot of favors, and had even Democrats joining him on agreeing to completely ban this $28 billion industry. Now, there is a 365-day implementation period before the bill would become law. It also needs to pass the House, and there are some other efforts that we're working on behind the scenes to see if we'll have similar House champions. And then, of course, the president needs to sign it. Now, if the president signs this bill, we already have bill sponsors lined up that would work for regulatory bills that could possibly override this bill and increase the milligram limit, or implement other regulatory regimes through proper channels like the FDA or HHS. So still a long way to go on this long saga of hemp, of course. But tonight, November 10th, was a tough defeat. I'm not going to lie. For Bayou City Hemp and Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Kerry Hinkle. We'll see you again next week.
Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto this week, pro-cannabis political candidates have a good week at the election polls led by the election of the first female governor of Virginia, Abigail Spanberger. No one is more happy about that than our own Virginia correspondent, Joe Parsons.
I'm Joe Parsons with a special election results report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The 2025 Virginia gubernatorial election will go down as an historic day in the Commonwealth.
In New Jersey, home grow is a possibility in the Garden State now that Mikey Sherrill is headed to the State House in Trenton. Plus, the state of Oklahoma shuts down their signature gathering for their adult use initiative, disappointing advocates in the Sooner State and the federal cause. Plus, a recent Gallup poll reinforces that a majority of Americans want legalization of cannabis, but Republican support for the reform cause drops by 13% in 1 year. And a recent study of intoxicating hemp-derived THC products in Missouri claims that 96% of those products sold in that state exceed the federal definition of legal hemp items of 0.3%.
And one of the sugar innovations, Space Poppers.
It was the 9th annual Harvest Cup competition in Worcester, Massachusetts, and Space Poppers won multiple awards on day one. Most of the talk was about the savory tactics and the threatening ballot initiative by prohibitionists in Massachusetts trying to shut down the industry.
We can't take it for granted, even though common sense would tell us that no one in their right mind would vote to eliminate an entire industry. But you got to go and vote. Having that opinion won't mean anything unless you go and vote.
The fact that people are saying, oh, well, it's written there and that's okay. You shouldn't have to be like, oh, you're lying to me. Let me double check. Let me take a look at this. Instead of just believing the person that comes up to you and is telling you certain parts of it. It's completely unethical. It's wrong in every way.
This is going to happen. It's going to get on the ballot. It's up to us as an industry to come together and make sure that the general public knows what those ballot questions actually are.
All that and more on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM TV's weekly documentation of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. I'm Alaina Pinto. It's been an interesting week of election results in what is considered to be an off election, since the biggest results were centered around governor races in Virginia and New Jersey. In fact, in both of those states, Democrats won by decisive margins. Abigail Spanberger in Virginia and Mickey Sherrill in New Jersey. We start in Virginia with Joe Parsons.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection by Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The Virginia's gubernatorial election has caught a lot of media attention because not only did Abigail Spanberger have a large amount of high-profile political support, but it has led to discussions from many about not if, but when the adult-use cannabis market will open. J.M. Padini, Executive Director for the Virginia chapter of NORML, was one of the first to weigh in on the issue, stating that, quote, Governor-elect Spanberger's administration has an opportunity to do what the Youngkin administration could not, implement a well-regulated adult-use cannabis market that prioritizes consumer safety, product transparency, and public revenue over illicit sales. Further adding, the framework is already in place thanks to years of legislative work and public input. With an administration poised to act, the focus now shifts from planning to building a retail system that Virginians can trust. J.M. Padini was also a key speaker and worked with the state's Cannabis Oversight Commission. Now, the big question remains, how long will all this take now that we have an administration poised to act? The answer lies in the hands of the General Assembly. What was so devastating about the vetoes from the past 2 years was the fact that the House of Representatives and the Virginia Senate had passed bipartisan bills for 2 years in a row. Now let's compare that in contrast to Pennsylvania, where Governor Josh Shapiro has practically begged his House and Senate just to work together to pass a bill so that he could sign it. So now it's time for our General Assembly to get yet another round of bills pushed through to the governor so that she can sign them. If we take a closer look at the current seats in the House, it paints a positive picture that the Democratic-led bills should go through just as they did last year. And even more interesting, most of the Republicans that kept their seats this year were the same to vote yes to this and the other cannabis bills that ultimately got rejected. So the path through the House looks positive, and a similar outlook is expected in the Senate. Once the adult use bill gets signed into law by our governor, it will go back to the hands of the Virginia Cannabis Control Authority to implement the license processes, establish fees, and set the testing and standards to match those already in place for the medical market. It could be a safe estimate of early 2027 to see the first round of operators in the Commonwealth. The next question will be, will the already established players in the medical market have the first shot at adult use licenses, Or will it be open to anyone with a dream to become a retailer? You can bet I'll be on top of that and many other questions in the future. Well, that's going to do it for Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
Here in Massachusetts, most of the attention on cannabis this past few weeks has been on some of the sordid tactics signatures are being collected to drastically reform the existing adult use laws in the Bay State. This past weekend, the Harvest Cup competition and trade show was held for the 8th time at the DCU Center in Worcester, Massachusetts. Executive producer Jimmy Young was on hand with Massachusetts reporter Curtis Emery, and they took a sampling of opinions from the pro-cannabis crowd about the ballot initiative that is going on in the Bay State that could drastically impact the existing industry.
I'm Curtis Emery with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, and I'm here on location at the Harvest Cup in Worcester, Massachusetts. And when I look around, I see so many of the great people who make the cannabis industry in Massachusetts what it is, and the same people whose livelihoods are on the line with the ballot initiative here in the state to overturn adult sales in Massachusetts.
How upsetting is that, Chief?
It is infuriating, and the reason why is because, like you said, I put everything into this, literally everything, life savings and everything. But at the same time, the reason why I'm here is because of a passion for the plant itself, because I came from the medical side. It's very important that people get access to these things. The medical market itself does not provide the best access. The adult use side provides access. So I'm huge on that one. I know how the campaigns are being run right now. $8 or $9 they get per signature. They're being very forceful to get people's signatures. They may be saying things they shouldn't be necessarily saying, but it's a well-organized campaign. If you estimate how much they're going to spend, it's about almost $1 million they're going to spend just in signatures alone. This is a well-organized campaign. You have to take it seriously. This is going to be a fight.
Do you think that you have the unity of people in the industry to understand how serious this is?
I think unity on this issue is very possible because it's obviously existential, right? If cannabis for adults is not legal, a lot of people's hopes, dreams, blood, sweat, and tears will be going down the drain. So you can't just sit back and say, how did this happen? We need to be actively, presenting a cohesive, coherent counterpoint to the prohibitionist rhetoric. And obviously the reports of, lying to people to get a signature is very clearly motivated by the money these people are getting paid. But, a signature doesn't mean a vote. So even if you got tricked and you signed it, go encourage people to vote. Go encourage people in your friend circle, your family, to go vote. Even if you're a single issue voter, great. This is an issue that literally, will make or break this industry.
And it's disturbing to me from that standpoint, as somebody who has been a part of the political process in Florida and Massachusetts and sees how they are completely using this process to manipulate the system and to take small businesses. We've worked so hard. Bada Bloom and other companies, especially small companies, we've spent so many years raising money. We've worked so very hard to try to make it within a highly regulated business where we're not allowed to write anything off with taxes, nothing, and they want to come after us and just make it all go away.
That's unfortunately the country that we live in. It's controlled by corporations. Politicians are going to listen to the lobbyist that has the most amount of money. So if our opposition has a significant amount of money that they're spending on lobbyists, then they're going to get the ear of those politicians. So, are you telling me that the political system in our country is corrupt and that,
No, they're not in business right now.
Exactly. So,
I've been Curtis Emery with the Bay State Report here for Cannabis Coast to Coast News at the Harvest Cup in Worcester, Mass. And I hope we'll be here next year.
The governor's race in New Jersey was not as contentious as the one in Virginia, since the Garden State already has a vibrant adult use market. The new governor-elect there, another Democrat named Mikie Sherrill, is on record saying that she wants to move forward with allowing home grow. And that's always been a target issue since the beginning in New Jersey. So here's reaction on the election from the Garden State with Jill Goldsberry.
Hey, welcome back to the Cannabis Coast to Coast News Report for New Jersey. I'm Jill Goldsberry with Cannabis Coast to Coast News, and we are pivoting to the November 2025 election, which has given the East Coast cannabis market a major jolt. The big news? Well, big news is the victory of Democrat Mikey Sherrill in the New Jersey governor's race. And according to the normal analysis, this is a clear win for policy progress and a major defeat for the cannabis status quo. Right now, New Jersey's market has been legalized since 2021, and we're still crippled by several problems. No home grow, high consumer prices, and uneven access. Sherrill's office promised to keep those limits, promised to assist in changing those limits, as where her opponent, Jack Ciattarelli, wanted to keep the limits locked in place. And the stakes could not have been higher for this election, for our market. And so Sherrill's victory means we can finally expect action on these critical issues. She's voiced strong support for expanding New Jersey's adult use market, and this includes the critical step of allowing homegrown cultivation, giving consumers the freedom and the ability to grow their own, which will directly combat the soaring prices. And this administration is also expected to prioritize improving consumer access, safety, and overall affordability across the board. And this will move New Jersey into a far more friendly, mature cannabis market, which this election has really made it a turning point so that constituents will be treated fairly in the cannabis market by this administration. So the Garden State is really set for an expansion, and we will see in the next 100 days what's going to happen with the new Sherrill administration in New Jersey. And speaking of affordability in cannabis, a new brand I wanted to let you know about is called Dragonfly Cannabis. You may see their red logos pop up from time to time, and you may also start seeing them in New Jersey. It's a brand out of Michigan, known for affordable, very effective cannabis. They've landed in New York City, and now they're expanding into our New Jersey market. So check them out and look out for them soon. I'm Jill Goldsberry with the Cannabis Coast to Coast New Jersey Report. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next report.
Another development in the cannabis reform movement this week comes from Oklahoma, where over the past 3 months, organizers had hoped to collect enough signatures to get adult use on the ballot for next fall. Unfortunately, that effort fell short this week, and organizers had to curtail the initiative. Needless to say, that makes Kimmy Cannabis sad, but not defeated. Here's Kimmy.
I am Kimmy Cannabis from Canna Talk About It with your Oklahoma Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Efforts to bring adult use cannabis to Oklahoma have hit another roadblock. The petition drive for State Question 837 failed to gather enough signatures to qualify for the ballot. This marks the second time Oklahomans haven't turned out in strong numbers for adult use reform. With so many licensed businesses going inactive and a shrinking medical-only market, many hope that adult use access would help our program thrive. Instead, the lack of signatures leaves the industry facing another year of uncertainty, limited growth, and tougher conditions for patients and providers alike. Meanwhile, new rules that took effect November 1st change how Oklahomans can possess or consume cannabis in vehicles. Senate Bill 786 now makes it illegal to have an open container of marijuana in the passenger area of the vehicle on a public road. The law also prohibits smoking or inhaling cannabis, including secondhand smoke, while driving or riding a motor vehicle. Even licensed medical patients are not exempt from these rules. All cannabis must be stored in a sealed container and kept out of reach while traveling. The message is clear. Safe transport and responsible use are now state law. And if that's not enough, the new patient portal system for medical card applications has been glitching since its launch. The switch to the new platform now requires patients to enter their social security number, which many feel is an overreach into personal privacy. Patient recommendations in businesses across the state that rarely have had issues before are now dealing with one problem after another. And patients, well, they don't have patience because this is their medicine and delays mean suffering. That's it for your Oklahoma report. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
There's a new Gallup poll out regarding the legalization of cannabis. Over the first 2 weeks of October, 1,000 adults were polled, and there has been a decrease in the total percentage of support for legalization. It's still a majority of 64%, but that's a 4% drop from the same poll last year. Since Gallup is a political pollster, the reason for that drop is tied to the Republican Party, which dropped 13 percentage points. Still, 85% of Democrats want to see it legalized, and 66% of independent voters support legalization too. Republican support has dropped to 40%. It was at 53% last year. Gallup reported that this drop in support from Republicans reflects perceptions that President Trump's aggressive actions supposedly limiting the entry of drugs in the United States has resonated with the president's base. Even though, as Gallup noted, quote, that the impact of these actions on drug imports, sales, and addiction in the U.S. is unclear so far, unquote. Perhaps if those 1,000 people who were polled watched Amy Carter's story coming up next, they would change their anti-legalization feelings. In her Michigan report this week, Amy has a story about a family whose child was stricken with cancer and then, as a last resort, used cannabis to combat that disease. Amy's Michigan report is sponsored by Wally's Wonder World, a website featuring handmade customizable humidors.
This is mold on wheat. This is mold on weed. And this is what this Wonderworld plant is supposed to look like. Do you want to make sure this never happens to your precious flower? Check out the handmade humidors by Fenton, Michigan craftsman Gregory Johnson. Each humidor can hold 1 ounce of your stash, and it comes with a Boveda humidity pack. You care about your flower, so protect it inside a humidor made with American-grown maple, cherry, or sapele wood. Check out their website at wallyswonderworld.com. There you'll find the famous award-winning Hakuna Matata No Worries Humidor. You'll also find a variety of humidors with different designs. They even customize accessories like doobie tubes, grinders, and even a classic roach clip from the 70s. Treat your stash with class with a custom-made, handmade humidor from wallyswonderworld.com, and never worry about moldy weed again.
I'm Amy Carter from the Michigan Wheatsters with this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. We often talk about the healing power of cannabis, and I know its impact personally. For my son Jaden, it helps control his outbursts and anxiety following his autism diagnosis, allowing him to thrive and move toward a high school graduation. It's success stories like Jaden's that makes me so proud to share another powerful Michigan's family story, now captured in a new documentary. Meet the family who faced every parent's worst nightmare. Their young daughter, Gray, was battling childhood cancer. After finding out she was allergic to chemotherapy, they were forced into a desperate situation and a decision that changed everything.
Walked in with a computer on wheels. And at that time, my daughter was starting to kind of come around. I was on one side of her. My husband was on the other. And she was just sitting there with her passy in her mouth, looking around. And they proceeded to show us an image of a very brightly lit, large brain tumor.
Baseball-sized tumor in the center of her brain.
So we saw the image. It was terrifying. We knew immediately what it was. And I think the next words out of the doctor's mouth was that it was aggressive and inoperable.
In the face of long odds, they turned to cannabis oil. The incredible results are nothing short of a medical miracle. The new documentary, Saving Gray, takes you inside the raw, intimate, and emotional fight for her survival. It's a powerful, unvarnished look at the faith and conflict this family endured just to bring this life-saving truth to light. You can watch the full film, Saving Gray, right now on YouTube.
He chose to lower her dose to the very smallest dose out of 21 kids in the entire trial. She was on the very lowest dose. So she took that very lowest dose, next to nothing, alongside cannabis oil for the remainder of the trial, which was 1.5 years. And she is the only one out of all 21 kids who had consent to use cannabis oil. She is the only one out of 21 kids who ever got clear scans. And to this day, she's the only one out of all 21 kids who hasn't relapsed and who doesn't have cancer anymore. All other 20 kids, when they came off of the trial, their tumor growth resumed. I was always told at every scan post-trial to expect to see some growth and not to panic because they were seeing it in the other kids. Her scans stayed crystal clear. They're crystal clear to this day. So they were wrong.
That's another story about how cannabis can change a child's world. So when prohibitionists bring up the question, what about the kids, we can say with confidence that there are parents like Grace and like me who can confirm it saved their child's life. And we are thankful for that. I am Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters, and that's it for this week for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The Michigan Report is sponsored by Wally'sWonderworld.com.
That'll do it for the A block, our first section of Cannabis Coast to Coast News, but we have plenty more state reports to share, including the election of a new mayor in New York City who is a regular in that city's dispensary scene. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
Corporations take it over. This plant, it's all about money with everybody, but the problem is nobody can pay their bills. Nobody pays their bills.
Your cannabis business could be overpaying by hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal income taxes because of one simple assumption that you're making about your accountant. A dispensary owner in Colorado called me frustrated as hell. He'd been working with the same accountant for 3 years. His accountant said, "What's 471C?" Here's what the ignorance of that accountant was costing this business owner. $180,000 every single year for 3 years. 471C has been around since 2017. We're talking about an 8-year-old tax provision that many cannabis CPAs don't fully understand. 471C is one of the most complex and highly debated tax strategies in the cannabis industry. If you want to make sure you're not leaving any money on the table, I'm offering free 471C reviews this month. Link in the description.
Accounting Buds has grown into Buds Group, the same award-winning quality, now with more service offerings. Buds Group, your best buds in the biz.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.
If you want to make history, if you want to be part of history, if you want to say you helped legalize marijuana in America, now is the time to join us.
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is the B Block, or second section of our weekly news show. I'm Alaina Pinto. There were a lot of firsts after Election Day, and we've already told you about the first female governor to be elected in the state of Virginia when Abigail Spanberger won. But did you know that Mickey Sherrill, another female who won a state's governor race in New Jersey, went to the same college? Both attended the University of Virginia, and when both were freshman representatives in Washington, D.C., they actually shared an apartment. And while Spanberger made history in Virginia, Sherrill also made a little history in the Garden State. When she won that election on Tuesday, she became the first female Democrat to win the New Jersey governor's race. There was another first on election night, too, in New York. City when Zohran Mamdani won the mayoral election and became the first Muslim to win as mayor in the Big Apple. The 37-year-old is also the first openly pro-cannabis mayor of New York. And during a debate 2 weeks ago, Mamdani admitted that he has purchased cannabis at a legal cannabis shop in the past. And when New York legalized the plant in 2021, Mamdani tweeted out, quote, "In the course of this debate, I've heard many of our colleagues from across the aisle discuss that smoking or ingesting marijuana is an indication of lawlessness and a deteriorating quality of life, makes one lazy and a burden to society, serves as a gateway drug, and amidst this fiction and frankly coded language, I'd also like to present a fact, which is that smoking or ingesting marijuana may also lead to you becoming an elected official," unquote. The times are changing. Or maybe they haven't. Media reports describe Mamdani as of Indian origin, born in Uganda, and now labeled as a democratic socialist Muslim. Can we just call him mayor now, though? He is also a 2014 graduate of Bowdoin College in Maine. There's an interesting story out of Washington, D.C. this week that was reported by Marijuana Moment about the writing of the 2018 Farm Bill. You might remember that bill basically gave the cannabis sativa plant a federally legal definition that is now called hemp. The man writing the letter to Marijuana Moment is Stephen Bevin. At the time, he was one of the principals for the U.S. Hemp Roundtable that helped Senator Mitch McConnell with the writing of the Farm Bill. In that original bill, the FDA was supposed to be the regulatory body for hemp-derived THC products, but 7 years later, the FDA hasn't done anything. In fact, they've allowed the infused products industry to grow mostly unregulated into a multi-billion-dollar market. As you probably know, our government is currently shut down and not really operational. Politicians continue to point bipartisan fingers at each other and blame each other for the current dysfunction. They now seem focused on closing the so-called loophole in that 2018 Farm Bill that was created when they actually passed it in the first place. In his letter, Stephen Bevin explained this week that there was never a so-called loophole that our current lawmakers are trying to fill. He made it clear that those who now want to ban all THC-infused products and, quote, claim it's about protecting children from dangerous products, he explains that, quote, simple age gating and responsible consumption resolve this. He continues, quote, instead of focusing on citizens' access to wellness and the positive economic benefits being realized from the national hemp experiment, it worked. They bizarrely suggest a return to prohibition, unquote. This is what Kerry Hinkle and his industry are frustrated about. Simple regulation, age gating, and more regulations on labeling should calm everyone down. But what this Congress will do is still anyone's guess. One state that is always in the news when it comes to cannabis or hemp is the Show Me State of Missouri. And this week, the Missouri Cannabis Trade Association released research titled the Missouri Hemp Hoax Report. In that report, the association purchased 55 hemp-infused products from illegal stores and had them tested. What do you think they found? 53 of the 55 products tested far exceeded the 0.3% of THC in dry weight that is supposed to be the limit for legal hemp-derived products. In addition to the fact that most of these products exceeded that 0.3% THC was the fact that many of those products had THC content between 10 and 80%. That's even more than the legal cannabis adult use shops in that state. They also found that 29% of those products purchased at illegal stores had harmful contaminants, including pesticides, heavy metals, and residual solvents. It seems every state has issues with THC-infused products, and now there are more issues in Arizona. So let's check in with Karen Black.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. First up, I need to set the record straight from last week. I reported the Arizona Court of Appeals was scheduled to hear oral arguments on November 4th in the case of the Hemp Industry Trade Association of Arizona versus Attorney General Chris Mays in the ongoing battle over the sale of products with hemp-derived THC. We think the hearing is scheduled for November 14th, but I can't confirm that at this time. Meanwhile, the temporary stay remains in effect, so non-licensed retailers can continue to sell these products while the appeal moves through the courts. We'll continue following this important case, so stay tuned. Speaking of HEDA, they represented at the Green Build International Conference this past week in Los Angeles. It's been 5 years this month since Arizonans voted to legalize adult use cannabis sales, but it's not exactly a celebration. According to Mary O'Driscoll's post on AZ Big Media, the industry is experiencing what leaders are calling a full swing market correction. Sales continue to decline, which experts say is actually healthy. The market overestimated demand, and now it's matching reality. Companies like Copper State Farms and Infused say the winners going forward will be the ones who consolidate, innovate, and introduce new product formats. Translation: scale up, stay lean, or get left behind. And speaking of workplace issues, an Arizona bud tender is taking Story Cannabis to court. The former Phoenix area employee filed a federal class action lawsuit alleging the company illegally withheld tips and used them to cover cash register shortages. Story Cannabis has 11 locations here in Arizona, and the lawsuit also involves former workers from Ohio and Maryland. At least 200 employees could be affected across all 3 states. We'll be watching how this plays out because it could set a precedent for labor practices across the industry. And lastly, some good news. Rose Law Group, which runs one of Arizona's most prominent cannabis legal practices, has been recognized in the 2026 Best Law Firms Tier 3 rankings in 3 practice areas in Scottsdale. That's the kind of business leadership Arizona's cannabis industry needs right now. That's all for this week's Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
There are only 6 states in the United States who have not decriminalized cannabis, and one of them is Idaho. That's a state that still has possession crimes on its books, but now there is a movement to change that. Over the past week, the Natural Medicine Alliance of Idaho received approval to start to collect at least 70,000 Idaho voter signatures by April 30th of next year in order to get a medical cannabis question on the ballot. The biggest challenge will be getting signatures from at least 18 of the state's 35 legislative districts. So let's hope they don't use some of the tactics that Massachusetts has been dealing with, a prohibitionist movement for a ballot question. Okay, let's check in with Tina Tasaka in Nevada and the tribal nations.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies, an iconic representation, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The Omaha Tribe of Nebraska asserts that the state has no authority to block non-tribal citizens from purchasing medical cannabis on tribal land. They say their program is fully tribally licensed, audited, tested, and regulated, separate from the state system. The tribe's Attorney General, John Cartier, signed off on the statement. They warn if the Nebraska persists in trying to obstruct their lawful operations, the tribe will defend its sovereignty through all available means. The inaugural Vlasic Classic took place November 8th at the Paiute Golf Course in Nevada, marking its first West Coast debut after 5 successful tournaments in the Midwest. More than just golf and good times, this event unites the community around a mission of advocacy, equity, and positive change within the cannabis industry. In partnership with the Last Prisoner Project, the Classic raises vital funds for legal aid, job training, and family reunification for individuals affected by cannabis-related incarceration. In addition to the tournament, attendees can enjoy a silent auction, live entertainment, networking mixers, vendor showcases, and community engagement activities, creating a full weekend of purpose and connection by blending philanthropy, sport, and advocacy. Vlasic Labs CEO Willie Vlasic launched the Vlasic Classic Charity Golf Tournament in 2023, first in the Missouri Ozarks, and then expanded to Michigan in 2024 to support the Last Prisoner Project. In 2025, the Michigan event also raised funds for Freedom Grow. That's it for the Nevada highlights and tribal nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Iconic Representation for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
I'm Marianne from Alibi with the Oregon Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Oregon's 2025 outdoor harvest is another record-breaking 12.18 million pounds. So far, 2025 production is running about 9% over last year's record-breaking harvests for another record-breaking year. Sales revenue so far this year is down about 4% compared to last year. This price compression is continuing to put extreme pressures on licensed operators. This upcoming year will be another test of operational efficiency for Oregon operators. And in better news, Oregon State University published a study showing that proximity to cannabis dispensaries is linked to lower alcohol consumption. Alcohol is one of the leading preventable causes of death in the United States. Also note that animal researchers in 1973 were unable to find a dose of THC that would be lethal for primates. So, can we now say that access to cannabis will create a healthier nation? I'm Marianne from Alibi with the Oregon Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
In the publicly traded cannabis stocks this week, one of the nation's largest multi-state operators, Trulieve, restructured some of their debt that was going to come due in 2026. This restructuring of their debt is more than $360 million, avoiding what many in the industry fear in 2026, when debt in the industry will come due. And some are referring to that day as a tsunami because of the amount of debt in the cannabis industry. What impact has that had on Trulieve stock? Here's Doug Miller.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Trulieve is paying off $368 million in debt. That's the full 8% loan well before its 2026 due date. Trulieve still owes about $110 million at 7.9%, but they're showing major strength with $450 million cash on hand and 12.5 million branded products sold last quarter. That's up 7% year over year. But it's not all good vibes. The company's also sitting on a hefty $616 million in uncertainty tax liabilities. Yeah, the IRS isn't exactly seeing eye to eye with their stance on 280E deductions. CEO Kim Rivers says their 2025 strategic plan is delivering results with progress on reform, distribution, customers, and branded products. So while other MSOs brace for a $6 billion debt storm coming soon, Trulieve just found a way to stay afloat. So let's see how Trulieve's stock chart looks. It's trading around $6.61, and it's been pulling back, but it's not looking bad to get set back up after this pullback. Watch for dips as it sets up, trade smart, and lock in those profits. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
Now it's time for the international reports on cannabis from around the world.
I'm Dave Barton from Thermador with your UK Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. And here today we're at the Charter House just look at this room. It's insane. We've got all the 16th, 17th century adornments around the room. We've had some really interesting and insightful conversations and presentations from patients, from medical professionals working here in the UK medical cannabis sector. We've heard about everything from the endocannabinoid system to terpenes to cannabinoids, all the way down to patient needs, drug interactions, and even people's personal journeys. So, again, some of the key issues we've been hearing time and time again today, very much about access to medical cannabis, how we can change that. The need for home grow has been a very, very important thing. NHS availability is another one that people really want to see happening here in the UK. And, it's the importance of community in helping new and existing patients navigate the medical cannabis system. And with, 12,000 NHS patients and 90,000 private medical cannabis patients, those numbers are only going to increase. And it's only a matter of time before The government needs to take this seriously and do something about it. I'm Dave Barton, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Let's check in now with our favorite clone guy from Chicago. Here's Mark Allen.
What's up, everybody? I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago clone guy, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm just outside of Chicago, Illinois. Thanks for tuning in. As always, I've had a busy week. Let's take a look at one of the many things I've done this week. Was to repot all these plants from their previous 1-gallon plastic pot containers into their new 20-gallon fabric pot containers. Notice how they're all elevated on the pallets to keep them from sitting on the cold concrete floor. If you leave a plant on the concrete floor in the winter, that concrete stays very cold, which in turn will keep the roots cold, which will allow them not to absorb nutrients. So long story short, elevate your plants to have better growth in the winter if they're on concrete. In other news, besides what I've done this week, the Chicago Sun-Times was actually doing some investigative journalism, which I'm happy to report, but I'm not happy to report what they found. Long story short, they went and got one of the most popular marijuana products in Illinois legally from dispensaries, pre-rolls. They got specifically about 10 pre-rolls. Almost every single pre-roll they got tested positive for mold, yeast, and various types of bacteria. All these pre-rolls were stated to be approved and clean by the state. Another issue that they found with these pre-rolls is that 2 of the 10 pre-rolls actually had dramatically less THC in them than listed on the box, the paperwork itself. And the reason why this is a big issue is that in the state of Illinois, you pay extra for higher level THC. You pay extra tax and extra money for that. So people paid extra quality money, extra for their product, and they got way less. But that was interesting news that I found out from Chicago Sun-Times. Thanks for doing that reporting, Chicago Sun-Times. But that sums up the news for Chicagoland area. I am Mark Allen, the Chicago clone guy, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for this week's edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Consume it responsibly, and we'll see you next week.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Pro Cannabis Media is now WPCM TV, your go-to website for things cannabis. WPCM TV is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news you need.
Amy Carter. This week, she reports from inside the State House in Lansing.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters with this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And talk shows about all things cannabis.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all you're doing to get the word out. Like, this show is so important.
It all started back in 2018 when Emmy award-winning talk show host Jimmy Young kicked it off with the In the Weeds podcast.
That it's not just any generic paper towel. You do have a brand that you use, right?
Yeah, we live or die by the bounty. I mean...
The quicker picker-upper! I love that!
His mission? Building an army of multimedia journalists and podcast hosts who are documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. Fast forward to today, and we've got the nation's only weekly cannabis coast-to-coast news program with Alaina Pinto.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM TV's weekly production of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. I'm Alaina Pinto.
Delivering the nation's only TV news-style program. Since June 2021, WPCM TV has racked up over 1.3 million views with 17 million impressions and picked up over 16,000 subscribers on YouTube alone. For more information, contact the team at WPCMTV.com.